All right, Talk Ticker fam, welcome back. I know, this isn't our usual earnings call deep dive.
It is a bit different, yeah.
Hey, sometimes you got to spice things up, right?
Definitely.
One of you amazing listeners reached out with a question, and honestly, it's been bugging me ever since, so we're tackling it head on today.
Oh, good.
Is this whole EU-China EV tariff deal the real deal, or just, a bunch of political smoke and mirrors?
Good question.
Luckily, we've got a resident expert on global markets here to help us unpack it all.
You bet. Glad to be here.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's rewind back to October for anyone who maybe missed a few headlines.
October, okay.
The EU decided to, slap some tariffs on those Chinese-built electric vehicles.
Yeah.
We're talking like up to 45.3%. They were saying it's all about those unfair subsidies, giving Chinese manufacturers an edge.
Right. And back then, a lot of people thought this was just the beginning,
Oh, yeah.
Like the first act in a trade war. Even within Europe, not everyone was on board,
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some folks were saying these tariffs would actually end up hurting European consumers.
In what way?
Well, by limiting choice and driving up prices. And of course, Beijing wasn't too happy about the whole thing.
No, I can imagine.
They started making noises about, retaliating.
It was getting pretty tense for a while there, wasn't it?
Definitely.
But then, just as things were heating up, we started hearing these whispers, these rumors of a potential deal.
Oh, yeah.
Bernd Lage, the chair of the European Parliament's Trade Committee, started dropping hints that negotiations were, going pretty smoothly.
That's interesting.
And this is where it gets really juicy.
Juicy. Okay.
Word on the street is that China might actually agree to sell their EVs in the EU at, get this, a minimum price. Like setting a floor on how much they can charge.
Interesting tactic.
Right.
Yeah.
Almost like they're trying to address those unfair competition concerns head on.
It's a way to appease the EU, I guess.
Yeah, instead of a tariff war, it's like, hey, let's find a compromise that, on paper at least, works for both of us.
Makes sense. And Lange actually said, I'm quoting here, this would eliminate the distortion of competition through unfair subsidies, which is why the tariffs were originally introduced.
So basically, the EU gets to protect its market from, a flood of those super cheap Chinese EVs.
Right.
And China still gets access to this massive, crucial export market.
Yep.
But, how would this minimum pricing even work?
Good question.
In the real world, you know?
Yeah.
It seems incredibly hard to actually enforce.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen loopholes in trade agreements before, right?
Oh, yeah.
Companies can get pretty creative.
They find a way.
Exactly.
Always do.
And let's not forget about the companies already in the European car market.
Right.
They're already scrambling to go electric. And now they might be facing even more competition from China.
Yeah, if Chinese EVs can undercut them on price or features, even with a minimum price in place.
A lot to juggle. So we've got this potential deal that, could be a win-win, but also a lot of question marks.
Yeah, lots of unknowns.
I always like to dig a little deeper, though.
Always a good idea.
What's the bigger picture here? Why are both sides so eager to strike a deal?
Well, it's about more than just tariffs, right? It's about the electric vehicle market itself.
Which is exploding.
Exactly. It's huge. For the EU, it's about staying ahead in green technology.
Yeah, they're really pushing that.
And, of course, making sure their own car industry stays competitive.
Can't let those Chinese companies steal all the thunder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for China,
Yeah.
it's about breaking into a huge global market.
And, I guess, becoming the EV leader.
Precisely. And, let's not forget the politics of it all.
Oh, right.
If this deal happens, it could mean that things between the EU and China are, warming up a bit.
Yeah. They haven't exactly been best buds lately.
No, not really.
So it's not just about cars, is it?
Nope.
It's about global power, technology, and even those political alliances.
It's a tangled web.
Okay, so we've got the backstory. We've got this potential deal on the table. We've even touched on those global implications.
Yep.
But now for the question on everyone's mind. What does this mean for investors?
That's the big one.
It is.
Yeah, that's what we're all trying to figure out, right?
Yes.
And I think to really get it, we got to look at how these tariffs have already messed with things since October.
Because, I'll be honest, when you first sent me this topic, I was like, international trade, boring.
Right.
But the more we dig in, the more it feels like, a high-stakes poker game or
Oh,
something.
yeah, for sure. And the players have been, well, they've been making some interesting moves. Like some European car companies, the fancy ones especially, have actually seen their sales go UP.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's like those tariffs, even though they were supposed to help them, they kind of backfired a little.
Oh, so.
Well, by keeping out those cheaper Chinese models, they gave the European brands some breathing room.
So like a short-term win.
Exactly. But it might cost them in the long run. They could lose market share.
Makes sense. What about the Chinese companies? How have they been reacting?
Well, some of them have been getting clever. Instead of trying to ship EVs directly to the EU, they've been setting up shop in places like Hungary and Serbia.
Ooh, sneaky. So they're basically building factories inside the EU.
You got it. Playing the long game, trying to sidestep those tariffs.
That's commitment.
It shows how badly they want it on the European market. And it's a good example of why this potential deal is such a big deal.
Because if those tariffs vanish,
Those Chinese companies could really take off in Europe.
dominate might be a bit strong, but
Yeah, they'll definitely be a force to be reckoned with. They've got the tech, the prices, and they're hungry to grow.
that's what I keep hearing about NIO. Like they're going after that luxury market and their tech is supposedly amazing.
They're one to watch, for sure. And it's not just the car companies themselves, It's the whole EV ecosystem.
What do you mean?
Well, think about batteries. China is already the big dog in battery production. More Chinese EVs in Europe means more demand for those batteries.
Oh, right. So companies like CATL and BYD can be laughing all the way to the bank.
Potentially, yeah. It's a ripple effect,
Yeah.
The whole supply chain gets impacted.
And don't forget about the stuff they need to make those batteries.
Oh, yeah. The raw materials, lithium, cobalt, nickel, all that good stuff.
Right. And China has a lot of control over those supplies, don't they?
They do. So more demand from Europe could mean higher prices for those metals.
So basically, anyone who's mining those key minerals could be in for a big payday.
It's like a new gold rush, but for EV materials.
Wow. Okay. So we've got Chinese EV makers, battery companies, mining companies. They all seem like potential winners here.
They've got a lot of potential upside, yeah.
But what about the European car companies? Are they all going to get crushed?
Not necessarily, but they can't just sit back and relax.
What do they need to do?
They need to adapt, invest in new tech, focus on making EVs that are both good and affordable.
So for investors looking at European car companies, it's more about being picky.
Yeah, look for the companies that are really embracing the EV revolution, the ones that are willing to change to stay ahead.
Right. So we've got our potential winners and some companies that might need to step on the gas a bit. But what about our listeners? Where does this leave them in all this? That's the million-dollar question, right? How do you actually make money off of all this?
Well, like always, rule number one is do your research. Don't just jump into EV stocks because it sounds cool. Got to know the companies, the technology, the financials, their strategies, all of it.
Due diligence, right. It's like you wouldn't buy a house without getting an inspection. Stocks are the same way.
Exactly. And with this whole EU-China thing, you really got to keep an eye on those regulations. The whole situation could change overnight depending on how this deal shakes out.
So stay informed, stay alert,
Yeah.
and be ready to, shift gears if things change.
Got it. But let's get specific. What can our listeners actually DO right now based on what we've talked about?
Okay, so if you're feeling bullish on Chinese EV makers, now might be a good time to start buying up some stock. Companies like NIO, XPeng, Li Auto, those are some big names.
But even if you're feeling good about them, don't go all in.
Right, diversification is key. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Spread the risk, yeah. Maybe look at a bunch of different Chinese EV stocks or even an ETF that covers the whole sector.
Smart. And if you're thinking about that raw materials angle, keep an eye on mining companies that have a lot of exposure to things like lithium, cobalt, nickel. Those are going to be hot commodities as EV production ramps up everywhere.
Got it. And what about for people who are more comfortable with, the big established companies? Yeah, you could look at some of the European car companies that are making a serious push into EVs, like Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, BMW. They might not be as trendy as those new Chinese brands, but they've got the resources and experience to compete.
Yeah, those guys aren't going down without a fight. So it's not a simple good guys, bad guys situation, is it?
Nope. There are opportunities everywhere. The key is to understand the risks and rewards and figure out what fits your investment goals. Got to know your own risk tolerance.
Great advice. All right, Talk Ticker fam, that was our deep dives into the world of EV tariffs. We talked about this potential deal between the EU and China and hopefully gave you some ideas about how to play the market. It's complicated stuff, but hopefully we made it a little easier to understand.
It's a wild ride, for sure. Just remember, stay informed, and sometimes the best opportunities are the ones you least expect.
Great advice. And if you want to keep learning about stuff like this, make sure you subscribe to Talk Tickers for more deep dives into the business and financial news that actually matters. Until next time, happy investing.